Hey there, guys. Welcome back to another edition of the Roleplay Spotlight. Today I have a very special guest, Goyanes. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Oh, not so bad, not so bad. So, we're actually very excited to have you because we've been trying to get you on for quite some time. Uh, the first question I ask every guest is, how did you end up in TNPRP?
Yeah, this is a kind of weird one. About like 5 years ago, I like just stumbled upon nation states, like trying to find some like country simulator game. I was just browsing Google and I found nation states, and I joined this RP region called the New Galactic Empire. I don't know if they're still around. Last time I checked, it kind of collapsed on itself uh, shortly after I left. But it was kind of weird. That part of my nation states career kind of feels like a fever dream, just because it's kind of long ago already, and I was young. I was like in eighth grade. But essentially, I became the delegate of that region. I don't know how. Uh, but then when I ceased being the delegate, I was appointed like the ambassador to the North Pacific, and that's when I got like exposed to the region for the first time because I think my nation actually spawned in TMP, but like I immediately left. But so when I was the ambassador to TMP, I was essentially I saw like the discussions they were drawing the current map that Eris is on, and so I was like, oh, this looks up my alley. So I was doing that for a while, and then when that region started to sort of fall apart, like it kind of became dead, I was like, screw this. I'm going to join TMP. This looks like a lot better. By then, I was like in ninth grade. So this is like 4 years ago. I'm a freshman in college now, but like ninth grade of high school, I joined TMP and been here ever since.
Not bad. It's not the strangest story that we've heard about how people came here. So let's kind of get right into it and take a look at your nation, Goyanes. What inspired it culturally and politically?
Um, so culturally, um, it's obviously it falls within like the sort of Nordic sort of RP group on Eris. But culturally, it takes a lot of inspiration from like sort of Japan and Germany and the Nordic countries. I just have an appreciation for sort of very efficient cultures and sort of like these weird cultural intricacies that I don't know, they fascinate me. I don't know, just like countries where like sort of like tradition and not only tradition but also like the sort of conformity to like the group goal, like and that sort of lends itself to efficiency. I don't know. I always found that very interesting because growing up in America, America is like a very like individualist country. It's very my way or the highway. So it's interesting to like sort of as like an outsider try to simulate that culture. Um, and so that was sort of inspiration. Politically, it's a constitutional monarchy, uh, pretty common on TMP. But I tried to spice it up by writing my own constitution and stuff like that, and trying to give it sort of its own flair, I guess. But it's a pretty run of the mill constitutional monarchy. It has a center right government, which I guess that's just the result of it sort of falling uh, into where I lean politically. But I mean, I try to twist it up every now and then.
Hmm. So you've mentioned your love of efficient cultures, which will immediately bring us to your train system, which is always on time. There's never a late train. Goyanis has one of the most in-depth world-built rail systems. What is the fascination with trains, Goy?
So kind of my whole life, I've been interested in transportation systems, mostly airplanes and trains. I'm studying to be an aerospace engineer, so getting that in there. But I always liked trains. I remember my parents took me when I was a kid to go see the live Thomas the Tank Engine when he came to the Railroad Museum here in South Florida. But that sort of kicked it off, and I watched Thomas the Tank Engine as a kid, and then I when I got my first laptop, in middle school, I would just like my free time, I would just like look at videos of the Shinkansen in Japan, and the TGV in France and stuff on the internet, and I'm like, man, this is really cool, and going once again to like sort of my experience in America, where we have a very lackluster public transportation system. That was like always like a dream of mine to just be able to like ride on one of these trains. It's a bucket list item. I still haven't done it yet. It's up there. The moment I get to either Japan or Europe, that's one of the first things I'm going to be doing. But I was like, you know what? There's like, I'm going to sort of make this like, pipe dream into a semi-reality within Goyanes. So just like that sort of personal passion sort of translated into that, and I was able to sort of manifest that and just sort of just take it to the next level. And it's obviously takes heavy inspiration from Japan, but that's just because I've done mostly a lot of research into the way the Japanese train system operates, and while it has its flaws, I like the way that system operates the best, so I based mine off of it.
Well, it's been widely joked about that you are the absolute king of trains. In fact, there's also the common joke that if we talk about trains, we'll be summoned. Um, but anyways, so tell us a little bit about the history of Guyana.
Yeah, so starting at the very beginning, the canon I have established is that Goyanes was sort of a collective of Nordic sort of Viking tribes and stuff like that, and like sort of feudal warring clans of Vikings. And then around the year 1 CE, 80, whatever you want to use, it came under the unification of the King Constantin of Nihet, who sort of unified the country, or at least the northern half of the country. The southern half of the country was being consolidated into the kingdom of Sornin. But so eventually, they consolidated the northern and southern half of the country respectively, and then I believe by the somewhere in the 800s, I believe, an act of union occurred, and the country became sort of a coherent empire. And Goyanes is relatively peaceful. It was on the far side of Gothis, so it never had a lot of interaction with Cravitor until the colonial period started. So it lended itself to sort of creating a peaceful, sort of peaceful. How do I put it? Very distinct society, I guess. That it wasn't completely shut in, but at the same time, they could focus on themselves, without having to worry about the outside world. And then as the colonial age started, they started expanding, first establishing a colony in Yalkan and then in other places, and then in the mid 1600s uniting with Andron, which was not a neighboring country, but I mean it's one country over. They had a real union until 1818, I believe, and then that sort of peaked with the Second Nordic Imperial War, in which Goyanes sort of and Andron sort of provoked the broader collapse of the Syrixian Empire and sort of ushered in the new world order. Sounds like the Illuminati, but like the new sort of grand scheme of world powers. And so yeah, it ushered in sort of a golden century of just like progress and prosperity, and then obviously the fascist war happened, and Goyanes came out victorious of that and sort of became the dominant power on Gothis, and within its sphere of influence, and there we are at the modern day.
So you've mentioned the fascist war, which is, for those who don't know, the heiress facsimile to the Second World War. Tell us a little bit about Goyanes' role in the fascist war.
Yeah, so the fascist war in Gothis, at least if I'm getting all my details straight here, started when Andron sort of the Valkyrist government came to power in Andron, either in the 1920s or 30s, I believe, and um, they sort of became like an aggressive expansionist power, trying to sort of recreate the golden days of the Adriatic Empire, right? And so they started. I believe they massacred most of the royal family and then started aggressively expanding outwards into Cohedes and into well, Godia, I guess. When we were coming up with this, it was still Ninhunland. I still occasionally think of that country name. Uh, but into Godia as well. And so Goyanes, they obviously that was an imminent threat to them. Um, they did not want to become like a junior power. So they started fighting back, and so they started working their way through Godia and through Cohedes and pushing Andron back into Andron. Um, However, there was a fascist government in Godia as well. And it was sort of like a situation where like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Um, and so Goyanes briefly cooperated with them to try to push Andron back into its original territory. But then immediately post-war, the Godian government under Gauchais Himdach, stupid name, uh, they tried to control the western half of Andron in violation of the Treaty of Middle, which is what resulted in the peace, after the fascist war. So Goyanes had to intervene and sort of push Godia back into their country as well. And then that was in the Gothis theater. In South Iteria, Goyanes had a colonial holding in the form of Goyanian South Iteria and parts of the Gen Empire. Um, and down there, we were mostly fighting Skanda, which I believe at the time was a colony of Andron as well, that had also turned fascist. So we were fighting them mostly, and there were some skirmishes on the border, but the fighting was nowhere as severe as on Gothis. But so after the war, I'm getting a bit off topic here, but after the war, sort of Goyanes and Godia they sort of had like a Cold War almost, and um, essentially that culminated in the Gotmark War in 1988, 1987, where uh, Godia tried to expand to I call it the Western Ocean. I don't know what the real name is. Uh, but they tried to expand to the Western Ocean by conquering Gotmark, and Gotmark is a ethnically and culturally Goyan country. At one point, they were part of Goyanes, and so Goyanes and Andron formed a coalition, and uh, invaded all the way through Godia. And so Godia fractured in half into its two sort of ethnic regions. Um, uh, Frisia, which is in the west bordering Goyanes, and then uh, I forget Hessenland. There we go. That's located next to Andron, which was the sort of Godia was a culturally Hessenlander country, so the Frisians were being subjugated by them. Um, but so that happened, and there was some territorial acquisition that was done by Goyanes and Andron afterwards. But that can sort of be seen as like a very long term extension of our involvement in the fascist war.
So, with how in depth that you have gone with even just the details of that, I think a lot of people are very curious to know what what kind of helps you bring such life to your world building. Like, kind of walk us through your process a little
Yeah.
bit.
So my world building process is I like to think that it's simple. Maybe it's harder for some people. I don't know. But essentially I like to see what happens to me in real life. Like a lot of my world building is done off of like my real life experiences. For example, like let's say I went to like a department store or something, and I'm in there and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing my shopping or whatever, but I'm also thinking in my head like, I wonder what this would be like in Goyanes. Like I wonder, how this experience would translate into Goyanes because like, I kind of like to. This kind of sounds crazy and stupid, but I like to live in Goyanes in my head sometimes because it sort of helps me come up with ideas and sort of visualize how things would work. Because it's one thing to just make a logo and stuff, but it's another thing. Well, like I like to go beyond that. Like I like to sort of establish like what type of things they do, like what services you can get at these places, and sort of translating my real life experiences into Goyanes is like definitely one of the top inspirations for world building. The other thing is I just like to browse the internet, read books and stuff like that, and sort of uh, be like, I get inspiration from that, and like even if I'm not experiencing these things in real life, like these are things that happen in the real world, and you know, it's just interesting. Like I can sort of migrate those experiences and learned things into Goyanes, and it sort of creates like a realism to it that like I really enjoy personally, at least.
Well, I will say it's not stupid to live in your nation inside your head because it does bring a very fantastic realism to the writing and the world building.
Thank you.
And so, with that, what has been your favorite role play to write so far?
Um, I like okay, so I don't do terribly much role play, but when I do, I like to get like sort of committed into it. Um, definitely, I've written some like one-off, just like single post stories because like they come into my head rather than a grand, arc of posts. But I've done some collaboration posts with Pry and For the King to Valhalla that I've really enjoyed. And Pry and I did like a two-post like one-off thing called Extrajudicial, which was about a troop of ethnically Pridanian Goyanian soldiers who were operating in Pridania during the Pridanian Civil War and sort of committing an extrajudicial execution of um, of an accused syndicalist party member. Um, and sort of there was like there was some emotion to that because like everybody knows the syndicalists are the baddies in the Pridanian Civil War story, but like um, the way Pry and I sort of got together to write that made you feel like a level of sympathy for the syndicalist member that was getting executed. Like it was very interesting because you didn't know essentially like it sort of skewed who was necessarily the good guy and the bad guy because the good guy is supposed to be the allied forces in Prytania sort of trying to liberate the country, and the bad guys are supposed to be the syndicalists, but those lines get kind of blurred in that role play. um, I've done some interesting sort of like slice of life stories. Like I wrote one of just like a salaryman coming, and it was just his commute back from work, and I thought that was a fun post to write because it was just um, it kind of stems from that same like inspiration for world building. It was just a day in the life. There's no overarching plot to it. It was just like, oh, this is a dude coming back from work. This is what he does.
So, uh, I'm guessing you kind of take the same approach to those slice of life posts because I have read most of them. They are very good.
Thank you.
So, do you kind of bring that same approach of trying to take your life experiences into your writing for role play?
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the sources of inspiration. But I sort of sometimes want to live vicariously through these people that I'm writing the slice of life stories about. Like I've written one where it's just a girl that gets high in her car one day, uh, in a parking lot in Ascalon, in like the late '90s, I think, or early 2000s, and I don't know. It was just like a sort of aesthetic that I wanted to picture and sort of live vicariously, as I said, uh, through these sort of stories. But I guess like another motive to it, you could say, is that like I just want to explore these sort of themes that I might never get to live through myself because like I don't want to involve myself in certain things, like, but I still want to sort of, imagine what it would be like, to have these situations, in this sort of world that you can do these things.
Right on. So, uh, sorry, I've lost my notes here.
No worries.
So, you've actually worked with quite a few people in the community on several projects. Is there someone in the community
Mhm.
that you kind of look up to as someone to kind of take after?
Yeah, there's definitely like a lot of people that I don't think there's any one person that like I could single out, but just to name a few people, like I love working with Andy, I love working with Pry, uh, working with Yalk is fun too. I'd like to start working more with Kyle in the future. He seems like a really cool dude, and I like Saint Tong is a really cool country in its own right too. That's also really well world built. I see he's in the audience here, so hello, Kyle. But um, I like there those are definitely people that I like enjoy working with. Like I always like comparing, just talking about world building with Kyle because he's also done a lot of work with Saint Tong, so it's fun to do. But I said I wasn't gonna single anyone out, but like if I definitely like I love working with Pride. He's such a cool dude. Pridini is such an interesting country because he sort of bucks the trend of like a lot of people come to Eris, like, and myself included. Like Goyanes would be considered a great power on Eris, but a lot of people come to Eris and that's just sort of like their intent right off the bat. It's like I want to be like America, like the superpower of superpowers, and that wasn't my intent when I came to Eris. It sort of just ended up happening like over like a couple of years. Oh, okay, like I guess this is my life now. Not that that's a bad thing. I like Goyanes' spot in the world stage, but I like what Pridani has done. He is exploring this small to middle sized country. That it's recovering from the civil war and it's sort of trying to create a new identity for itself while also calling back its previous like identity from before the Civil War and from before the syndicalist time. So it's a very interesting RP experiment, and um, you know, it's very fun to see that like that develop and that work that he's done with it.
I believe Pridania has been the most singled out person in every RP spotlight when I've asked that question. So we have an audience question from Art. Will Guyana seek to establish itself as even more of an international power?
um, I mean, I'm not opposed to that, but like at the same time, I don't exactly know where I want to take Goyanes in the future. I very much roleplay Goyanes as I go. Like I have some ground rules, and some ground ideas, but I very much do things as they come, like as things happen, as sort of the situation evolves. Definitely our status as like a global, uh, I don't know, global power is the right word, but as sort of one of the major powers on Earth has definitely been challenged in recent months. Especially the whole situation with uh, the situation in Yamantau with the Imperium, where uh, they wanted to establish a naval base in Yalkan, and Guyana has obviously very long withstanding ties with Yalkan. Yalkan is another ethnically Goyan country, so we took that sort of personally, and we were gonna stand up for our influence, and not let that be challenged. But I definitely think, aside from Gothis, where our influence is sort of extremely evident, um, we have some influence in Cravader and Northern Cravader. Obviously with our aid that we've given to Pridanian, sort of, we have allies there. We have some influence in South Iteria, obviously, through Ascalon, but um, I don't know, like person, like I don't know what's going to happen in RP. It's very much sort of like real life. You don't know what tomorrow is going to be like. Yeah, I would like to preserve that, I guess, but like that, there's sort of something weird about that. Like it feels sort of wrong because this is just a game, you know. Like it's like we're doing this to write, so it's what I sort of end up seeing is that like people sort of they become personally like attached to their countries in the respect that like if they see their country losing influence, they sort of start thinking like a citizen of their country and like that they have to do everything in their power uh to keep that influence. And I think there can be room and sort of opportunities to do role play, like sort of exploring the situation of like a country that's influence is waning, or like a country that's influence is starting to grow, or one that's still maintaining their spot on the global scene. So I don't know. I would like to say yes, but in reality, I don't really know. You know, new players are joining every day. New players are leaving every day. So like, Eris is just too fluid of an environment to definitely say yes or no to that. Like things happen on a daily basis, so it's just hard to give a definitive answer to that, in my opinion, at least.
That's fair enough. Uh, you mentioned the incident with the Imperium trying to establish a naval base in Yalkan, which kind of leads into the second part of Ark's question. Will Goyanes seek to establish influence elsewhere, such as Matera, Craviter, or Kian?
Um, so at the moment, like definitely sort of improving our influence in northern Matera, whether that's by strengthening our facilities, our existing facilities in Yalkan, or improving our ties and relations with Saint Tong, that would definitely be a priority for the current Norberg administration in Goyanes. Jan Norberg's the High Chancellor of Goyanes. And in Craviter, we sort of have like enough influence. Like I am content with the influence in Craviter. Personally, there's a bit too many issues going on in Craviter for me personally to want to involve myself. Um, Craviter has way too many sort of petty conflicts, in my opinion, uh, that we that our allies can handle. Uh, Goyanes is definitely a country that would rather, instead of having a huge monopoly on its influence everywhere in the world, would rather sort of share that influence with like-minded countries, to cooperate. It would rather, if like it would rather have like partial influence in sort of Craviter than complete influence. It's not our, we don't see that as our place to have total influence, I would say. On Gothis though, we definitely are completely vested in sort of keeping our influence, because there are other powers that sort of seek to that would seek to undermine it, particularly Ilya. Even though they don't RP that much, they are sort of the other axis of power in Gothis. And sort of Antrim is also becoming increasingly more militaristic, especially with the recent events in Dutch Rijeka, to say the least.
Yeah, the Dutriekan War has caused quite a bit of world commotion.
Yeah, more than I would like, especially so close to home.
That's fair. So I'm gonna kind of give you some random off the wall kind of questions here.
Yeah, go
That
for it.
all right. What is the most popular dish in Guyana?
Oh, that's a fun one. So definitely I would have to say up there like is the fried cheese sandwich. I believe it's like a steak toast sandwich is the name for it. It's in the food dishes of Eris thread if anybody wants to read more into it, but it's essentially a slice of cheese that has been breaded and deep fried and then put between two buns, usually with some ketchup and mayo between the buns and the cheese patty, I guess. That's like the like very stereotypical like street hot dog, but like in Goyanes, like there's carts on street corners selling them, and like you can walk into a fast food joint like a quick halt and pick up a steak toast sandwich. It's a drunk comfort food tea. Like it's just very like commonplace to the point where I believe Sasson and I had written this out that when Sasson set some regiments to Goyanes to fight in the fascist war to assist in the Allied cause, and they learned how to make those and brought the recipe back to Sasson, and now it also exists there as a street food. That's definitely probably pretty high up there on the most consumed foods list. There's definitely like sausage sandwiches and stuff like that, and your meatballs with egg noodles and stuff like that. But the steak toast fried cheese sandwich is probably the most popular one.
That sounds absolutely delicious, and I will have to try and find a way to make it myself.
I have yet to make it. I want to though.
Well, maybe we'll have to have a cooking with Goy episode.
Perhaps.
So, what? I think I already know the answer to this, but what is the national sport?
The national sport of Goyanes, there's two, I would say, but by far the more popular one is Goyan football, which is just the Eris analog of American football. Definitely at the collegiate level, though. Collegiate Goyan football is sort of like an enigma in its own. It's very fun, like you've got the marching bands, and it's very similar to the American college football experience. You've got like the game day, the tailgates. It's very fun. Like everybody's got like a college that they support. I've world built the like all the universities that partake in the college football league. It's I think like 30 something, 32 or 34 teams. They're divided into 4 conferences, and they have like a round robin that then creates a 14 playoff. So the winner of each conference goes to the playoff. But so definitely that, and then obviously the winter sport is hockey. Being a Nordic country, we have our Goyanes and Andren share a hockey league, so the champion of each country will then face off in a final championship in a Nordic hockey league. And then there's also normal soccer, but that's like a spring sport. So you have like you have Goyan football in the fall going into the winter, and then you have hockey going into the winter to early spring, and then soccer going from spring to summer. So that's the sort of yearly cycle of sports there.
So, who is the most famous player from each of those in Goyanes?
Oh boy, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't world built that many players. At least from the soccer scene, though, I know it's a travesty. From the soccer scene, though, because I did do we won the World Cup, the last in Canon TMP World Cup. Goyanes is hosting as well, so that was fun. But so our star player is Jorgen Admison. He's a striker for the Goyanian national team, and he's also the striker for Nederfjord Locomotive, which is the soccer club representing the primary soccer club representing Goyanes' second largest city, Nederfjord, Nyhet. So that's the by far the most popular player for Goyanian soccer. Though the name I haven't world built one for hockey, but the name escapes me for Goyan football. Though it was the quarterback for Nyhet State University. I forget his name. There's a news post somewhere if you search far enough, and you can get that name.
So, moving on to some more cultural influences, what would you say you took inspiration from for Goyanes' architecture?
Architecture, that's an interesting one. So Goyanes and Nederfjord are based off of New York and Toronto, respectively. So you sort of have like that like Art Deco, but like also like 60s skyscraper sort of architecture. But you also have a lot of classical, neoclassical structures. And I think some of the other cities in Goyanes, there's an interesting mix of architecture because like you have, for example, Hosensaig, which is the capital Hisenda, which is one of the kingdoms in Goyanes, is based on Stockholm. So it has a more typical European sort of narrow street, sort of low-rise building architecture. And sort of you have those influences, and you know, I guess it sort of varies, but it's broadly sort of I'd like to say transatlantic architecture. So it blends, American sort of big city architecture from the Northeast, where sort of the cities are more compact, right, with sort of European classical architecture from Europe, Western Europe, Germany, England, the Nordic countries,
Goy.
Reg, we're doing the RP spotlight.
Okay.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. So,
Things happen. It's all right. No, but I just about finished. So
okay. What would you say is probably the most important book in Goyanes?
important book. That's an interesting one. I definitely want to world build some more fiction books, but definitely the one that I have world built sort of having influences. Let me pull it up here. On There's like a Books of Eris thread. It's though in summary, it's a book about it's a historical sort of. Yeah, here we go. The coldest winters bring beautiful summers, a memoir of the Gottmark War. So it's about a Goyanian soldier named Reidar Larson, who's also the author, and he enlists in the Imperial Army 2 years before the war, and obviously he gets sent to battle in 1988, which is when sort of boots really started to get onto the ground. But so it sort of goes through like sort of these harrowing accounts of like the destruction of these Godian cities and like how it sort of mentally affected not just him but like his platoon members as well. And sort of it sort of became a book about the broader state of Goyanes in the late 20th century. Like it became sort of an introspective. It caused a lot of introspective thought in Goyanes. Sort of like, what are we really? What are we doing? Like, because like yes, we are obviously like there's a moral justification for the Gottmark War, but like, what is the justification behind like this like complete destruction and mayhem and sort of horror that we are inflicting on Godia and like the rump states that are going to come of it? Because that created a sort of whole social issue afterwards after the Gottmark War. Goyanes, a lot of people like to think of Goyanes as sort of just like a very good country, but like they screwed up. They did not adequately provide aid after the war to the really Godian rump states, and so what ended up happening was that there was a lot of crime and sort of not just crime, but these countries, especially Hessenland, became very destitute for a while until a new government took place about 10 years later, and Guyana started to finally pump aid into these sort of downtrodden countries. And now relations have sort of normalized, but this book is definitely sort of caused that change in thought. The year of publication is listed as 1994, but sort of it caused this broader social sort of change. So definitely in recent Goyanian history, this is one of the most influential books for sure.
Okay.
And sort of
So
broader history, though. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead,
Uh, I'll keep it concise, though. In sort of broader history, though, one of the more influential books is by Goyanian playwright Wilhelm Anthony Thaddeus in his book Ingmar the Third, which is about it dramatizes the story. It's like sort of our version of Shakespeare. It dramatizes the story of its namesake, Grand Emperor Ingmar III, who reigned from 1562 to 1588. But it follows the final years of his life, where his quest for power leads him to poison and kill his brother Geirolf the Sixth as he seeks the throne. And while Geirolf's son, Geirolf the Seventh, eventually retakes the throne from Ingmar, like the scars left in sort of the nation continue to fester, leading to the Second War of Goyanian Succession. And it's sort of seen as like an allegory for a lot of modern political drama and sort of the danger of greed and lust for power. Even though it's sort of very historically inaccurate, because it's a dramatization. But yeah.
Fair enough. So, kind of sticking with the arts theme here, what is the most popular genre of music in Goyanes?
Fun. So I would like to say that it's probably sort of what we were hearing in 90s rock, so sort of grunge and alternative rock. The thing is, I don't, there's a reason that was popular at that time, and I don't know if the same sort of societal conditions are present in Goyanes for that to be the popular music of choice, but I would like for that to be the case. I definitely love bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, so, equivalent bands would probably be playing on the radio in Goyanes, Alice in Chains, that's sort of fun fun music to me, but at least.
I can really, really respect that. Those are fantastic bands.
Thank you.
So we have another audience question. This one is from Mad Jack. How challenging was it for you to come up with the Gothic identity and language, and how satisfying has it been to see that grow to the point that it's present in almost a dozen nations in Ames?
So the language bit was definitely I didn't know what I was getting into when I started making Goyan as a language. I was at the beginning, it was just sort of like I would go into Google Translate, put a word in, and half of the word would be German and half of the word would be Norwegian, and I would just sandwich it together. But over time, I sort of started to learn like the different sort of grammatical suffixes and little weird things in both of those languages. And sort of Goyan has evolved into like its own language, but it still sort of takes its influence from that, like that it's like half Norwegian, half German. That's definitely been an ongoing project. I sort of create translations as I need them. I don't have I have a dictionary, and sort of I know personally I have memorized some of the more common words in Goyan. But I mean, that hasn't been too much of a challenge. Treating the Godian, or the not Godian, but the Godic identity has definitely been fun. I definitely didn't see it as like a challenge, but I definitely sort of thought of it more as like there's always going to be the desire of people on the internet, especially younger folks, to sort of RP like a Germany analog. It's they're a dime a dozen. But sort of creating this identity that was more Scandinavian influence as opposed to continental Germanic influence was fun because it sort of adds its own flair to it. But honestly, most of the legwork was just done by being kind to people and sort of like when I would see that people wanted to do this, wanted to sort of RP those cultures on Eris, like I would, approach them in a very sort of like when I would approach these people, it wasn't like, hey, do you want to be my colony? It was more like, hey, do you want to like maybe be like historically derived from like the same population groups or something, And sort of that definitely, in my opinion, is a much better way of spreading a culture than going down the imperialism route. Sorry, Xerxia, I know you're a pal of mine, but I don't jive with that personally. Even though Goyanes does have a colonial empire, like and in most of the places that we did have colonies, it's not like there's not a complete Goyanian like hegemony on the culture. I've like especially in Ascalon, it's sort of RP'd this weird fusion between the sort of native Chinese influenced culture and the Goyanian culture, which I find to be personally interesting. But definitely like just being sort of nice to people and very willing to work with what ideas they had as well, and being very willing to compromise and sort of like change things to sort of accommodate people definitely helped. So in that respect, it wasn't challenging, and the fact that it also developed over a sort of long time and not just over the course of a couple weeks or a couple months definitely helped. Like it's sort of very like uh, naturally developed, I guess. Like over the course of time, it wasn't artificially created like sort of like that we had to have an RP convention, get everybody who had the same culture together to like get in a chat room and sort of decide what they were going to do, and like people were fighting over the names. It was very sort of symbiotic how we developed it, and honestly, like I couldn't have done it without Andy. Andy and I, we like to think of each other as like the original Nordic Viking duo, and I definitely couldn't have done it without him because he's done obviously a lot of work as well in that regards. But yeah, definitely sort of being willing to work with people is and not imposing yourself on people as well is definitely the way to go with that.
So kind of going back to like the little random questions. Who would you say is the most important, like the single most important figure in Goyanian history?
Um, I would have to say, probably um, Grand Emperor Johannes the Eighth, I believe is the number. I can pull that up. Sorry, good. Johannes the Ninth. Johannes the Ninth was the uh, Grand Emperor who was presiding. He was the first Grand Emperor after the United Kingdom of Andron and Goyanes split up. His twin sister Isabel was the Queen of Andron, but he was the one who was presiding over Goyanes when they had the Second Nordic Imperial War, and he definitely sort of created the Goyanes that evolved into the power that it became in the 20th century. Like he did a lot of that legwork in the 19th century, so that he walked in the 19th century so that Goyanes could run in the 20th and 21st century is a good way to put it. Like he was not necessarily in the front lines, but he was strategizing like this sort of war, and sort of how we were going to proceed after the war too, like the grand architect of like the new sort of um, Goyanian sphere of influence essentially. And he's definitely like he's the type of guy that you have public squares everywhere, and like all the cities are named after him, and he's got streets, like there's always a Johannes the Ninth street somewhere. There are a dime a dozen all over Goyanes.
Who would you say has been the biggest villain in Goyanes' history?
Biggest villain, there's a couple. So if you would have asked somebody in the you know early 20th century, it definitely would have been Nystrom, the fascist dictator of Andron. In the 1800s, whoever was running Sirixia, uh, like late 20th century, I would say probably Gauchais Hindak, the the fascist dictator of Godia. Those are definitely the big baddies that Goyanes has had to sort of face, and those are definitely the sort of archetypal villains in Goyanes' history, I would say at least.
What would you say is the most popular beverage in Goyanes?
Uh, Alcohol or not alcohol?
We'll go with both. Let's
Okay,
explore
both. Okay, for beer, it's probably well, alcohol is it's definitely beer. I definitely see Goyanes as one of those countries that's like consuming like an inordinate amount of uh kegs of beer per capita. But it's probably Harheimer beer is the biggest one in Goyanes. It's just a typical sort of um golden wheat beer. It's easy to drink. It's nice when cold on a hot summer's day. Refreshing, kind of tasty beer. Uh, as far as like soft drinks go, it's probably Jornbrow, which is it means iron brew in Goyan. It has no similarity to the Scottish soda.
I
But
was just about to ask.
yeah, it aside from name, that's the only similarity. I would say it tastes somewhere along the lines of Dr. Pepper and Coca-Cola. if that makes sense. Like it's somewhere in between. It's not exactly either one, but that's sort of where the flavor profile is for that. And it comes in this nice purple and pink can, like with triangles on it. I can post the logo later, but yeah, that's probably the most popular soft drink.
That actually sounds pretty good.
Yeah,
So,
I'd like to think it tastes good.
so I just have one last question for you before we wrap up here.
Yeah, of course.
Where do you kind of see the future of Goyanes?
So the future, that's interesting because I sort of touched on this earlier, with the question that Ark asked. I see Goyanes as sort of becoming like that country where people look up to, like you think of Goyanes and you think of good things, like contributions to the world, I guess. That sounds really like narcissistic. Fuck. Uh, but
No, it makes sense.
I would like to see Goyanes in that role in the future, and whether that's as a great power, as a medium power, only time can tell. But I would like that to be like Goyanes' legacy. Like this is a country that contributed to the world. It wasn't a net negative.
And I believe I have lied. We do have one more audience question before we wrap up.
Yeah.
And it is from Walpen Islands, also known as Faltu on Eris. How does Goyanes view Auroria, specifically the Imperium, as a regional power?
Yeah. So this sort of Goyanes Imperium thing is sort of recent, like within the past year, past couple months. It started to develop. Uh, Essentially, Guyana sees the Imperium, no offense, Steve, as sort of this upstart power that's trying to grow its influence by sort of putting itself into other countries' spheres of influence. In our case, by trying to build a naval base in Yalkan, uh, and sort of we see that as like, look at these kids. But that can also be a sort of detrimental opinion to have because then you underestimate your adversaries and you don't want to be doing that. Uh, but that's sort of how Goyana sees Imperium. I'm not too well versed personally on what's been happening in Aurora only because I've been in college the past couple months and I've not had as much time as I've had before to sort of be reading up on roleplay as consistently. Sadly, I'd like to do it more often, but I sadly struggle to find time now. Like nation states is a bit lower in the priority list, but in the summer and on breaks and stuff, I still like to read RP and stuff. Uh, Aurora is obviously the newest continent that's been unlocked on the map because the map land area percentage hit the threshold. Um, so not a lot of, at least in my opinion, not a lot of terribly influential things have happened on Aurora yet. But the first thing I think of Aurora is like Syrixia's attempts to create sort of business on Aurora to sort of expand their own influence. I just find it funny. It's like a funny situation. Like, of course they would do that. Uh, like,
To my knowledge, Syrixia has basically been chased off by both the
that's fun.
Imperium and their Afiran lackeys.
Yeah, fun. My opinion of Aurora is that it's almost sort of like a cultural enclave of a lot of people who have recently arrived from the RMB that are joining Eris. Um, and no offense to the RMB, it's just not that it's bad, but it's just a different style of RP. Like, not to knock it because I haven't tried it yet. It's not my thing. But I see like a lot of that seeps in through Aurora, but like that's a bad thing. We could definitely use some fresh ideas on Eris because it can definitely get stagnant sometimes. Uh, but because it's the newest thing that's opened on the map, like a lot of people who have been coming from the RMB have been joining it onto Aurora. So, um, you know,
I I'll take that because like as an RMB transplant to Eris,
Yeah.
And basically the progenitor of civilization on Aurora. That's fair to say. Is that Aurora is kind of the starting point for RMBers making their way into Eris. It's easier for them to interact with each other. I think that's fair to say. Well, it has been fantastic to have you on the show, Goy. I have
Thank
really
you
been
for
looking
having me.
forward to it. Yeah, it's it's been a really fun, uh, very informative show for me, I believe. Well, guys, this has been the RP Spotlight for March 28th. You guys have a wonderful day. I'll catch you
See
next
you guys.